The howling wind of Valdris, 7 cut through Sergeant Kellen Bryce's environmental suit like frozen daggers, even through the reinforced heating elements. He'd been stationed on this godforsaken ice ball for 3 months now, monitoring the volatile northern territories where Zarnari and human forces maintained their uneasy joint patrol agreement. Most days, the only company he had was the rhythmic ping of his equipment scanners and the occasional supply drop. Tonight was different. The weather satellites had predicted a Category 4 storm, but what hammered against his temporary shelter felt more like the moon itself was trying to shake apart. Kellen hunched over his monitoring station, watching temperature readings plummet to levels that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A rhythmic tapping against the outer wall of his insulated tent, too deliberate to be debris. Kellen grabbed his thermal scanner and swept the perimeter. The heat signature was unmistakable, humanoid, but with the distinct biothermal pattern of a Zarnari. And the readings were dangerously low. Damn protocol, he muttered, grabbing his emergency medical kit. Outside, he found her collapsed against a supply crate, her usually pristine Zarnari armor sparking with electrical failures. Ice crystals had formed along the seams where her heating systems had given out. Even through her helmet's faceplate, he could see her pale purple skin had taken on an alarming blue-white tinge. "Hey! Can you hear me?" Kellen shouted over the wind. Her dark eyes focused on him with obvious effort. Sergeant Bryce?" Her voice came through the comm system in stuttered gasps. "My armor, malfunction." Storm came faster than predicted. Without hesitation, Kellen scooped her up. Zarnari were lighter than humans despite their height, and carried her toward his shelter. She was barely conscious, her body temperature critically low even by alien standards. Inside the heated tent, he set her down on his sleeping pad and cranked the portable heater to maximum. "We need to get you out of that armor. The heating elements are fried and it's just conducting cold now." Thessa, he remembered her name from briefings, nodded weakly and began working at her armor's release mechanisms with trembling fingers. Kellen turned away, giving her privacy, but heard the distinctive hiss of seals releasing. "Your customs," she said softly. "I do not wish to offend." Kellen glanced back and immediately felt his breath catch. Her pale purple skin held a subtle bioluminescent glow, like starlight trapped beneath translucent silk. The intricate patterns of darker purple that traced along her arms and shoulders weren't tattoos, he realized, they were natural, like elegant alien constellations. "Is it not custom on your world?" she asked, wrapping his emergency blanket around herself, "to shed armor in heat sanctuaries?" Kellen swallowed hard, realizing how little he actually knew about Zarnari culture despite months of joint operations. Yes. Of course. I just wanted to respect your privacy." She tilted her head, studying him with those impossibly dark eyes. "Privacy from cold means death. You saved my life, Sergeant. There is no dishonor in survival." The thermal blanket did little to hide Thessa's elegant form as she settled cross-legged near the heater. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently with each heartbeat, creating an almost hypnotic display that Kellen tried not to stare at. He busied himself preparing hot rations, acutely aware of the intimate confines of his shelter. "Your people," Thessa said, her voice still weak but warming, "they fear sharing body heat, yes? I have observed this in joint operations. Always separate sleeping arrangements, even in crisis." Kellen handed her a steaming cup of synthetic coffee, their fingers brushing for a moment. Her skin was surprisingly warm now, almost fevered compared to humans. "It's not fear exactly. We have boundaries. Personal space concepts." "Boundaries," she repeated, testing the word. "This word, I know it in military context. But for warmth survival?" Her dark curls framed her face as she shook her head. "On Zareth, during the ice seasons, families cluster together. Strangers even. Warmth is life, there is no shame in the sharing. But the armor removal." Kellen started, then stopped himself. Thessa's luminescent patterns flickered brighter for a moment. What he was learning might be their equivalent of a blush. You thought I was offering more than warmth. It wasn't a question. Your species associates unclothed bodies with mating rituals. The bluntness of her statement made Kellen nearly choke on his rations. Well, when you put it like that. Among my people, armor is prison. Flesh is freedom. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders. To share skin warmth is trust, not seduction. Though. She paused, studying his face intently. The distinction can become unclear. Something in her tone made Kellen look up from his food. The bioluminescent patterns along her visible neck and shoulders were pulsing in a different rhythm now, slower and deeper. What do you mean? I have studied human physiology for military cooperation. Your species responds to visual stimuli, elevated heart rate, proximity. Her dark eyes held his. I am experiencing similar responses, though we do not typically acknowledge such things. The tent suddenly felt much smaller. Thessa. Do not misunderstand, she said quickly, though her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. I merely observe. Analyze. It is curious how warmth sharing can create such complications. Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury, shaking the tent walls. But inside, a different kind of tension was building. Kellen found himself leaning closer, drawn by the ethereal glow of her skin and the vulnerability in her eyes. Your patterns, he said softly, they're beautiful. What do they mean? They are emotional indicators. What you might call involuntary responses. She touched the glowing tracery along her collarbone. This pattern indicates heightened awareness, interest, attraction to. She stopped abruptly. To what? Her luminescence flared bright for a moment before settling into a steady, warm glow. To you, Kellen Bryce. Despite all logic and protocol, I find myself drawn to your warmth. Not just physical warmth. The admission hung between them like a charged field. Kellen set down his rations, fully aware they were crossing into uncharted territory, not just personally, but diplomatically. I should be more careful, Thessa murmured. Your customs, your boundaries. Maybe, Kellen said, shifting closer until he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, some boundaries are meant to be questioned. The storm outside intensified, but within the confines of the shelter, time seemed suspended. Thessa's bioluminescent patterns cast dancing shadows on the tent walls as she and Kellen sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing both warmth and something deeper. Tell me about Zareth, Kellen said, his voice low. The proximity of her alien beauty was intoxicating, but he genuinely wanted to understand her world. Cold. Always cold. Thessa's fingers traced abstract patterns in the air, mirroring the luminescent paths along her skin. We evolved in ice caves, clustered together for survival. Emotional isolation meant death, so we learned to share everything, warmth, feelings, fears. She paused. Until we met other species and learned that such openness was seen as weakness. So you built walls. Armor, she corrected. Physical and emotional. Your people taught us that strength meant independence, that vulnerability was a flaw to be hidden. Her patterns dimmed slightly. I have worn that armor for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to remove it. Kellen studied her profile in the soft glow. What does it feel like now? Terrifying. She turned to face him fully, and he saw raw honesty in her dark eyes. And wonderful. You make me remember what it means to be Zarnari, not just a soldier. Without thinking, Kellen reached out and traced one of the glowing patterns along her forearm. Her skin was incredibly soft, and warm like silk left in sunlight. These patterns, do they hurt? No, she breathed, her luminescence intensifying under his touch. They feel like singing. When you touch them, it is like harmony. Her admission sent heat racing through Kellen's veins. The simple contact had somehow become the most intimate thing he'd ever experienced. "Thessa. I know," she whispered. "This complicates everything. Our species, our duties, our futures." Her hand covered his, keeping his palm pressed against her glowing skin. "But I cannot bring myself to care about complications right now." The storm chose that moment to slam against the tent with particular violence, and instinctively they moved closer together. The thermal blanket slipped from Thessa's shoulders, revealing more of her luminescent beauty, and Kellen's breath caught. "Is this wrong?" he asked, his voice rough with want and uncertainty. "By whose rules?" Her free hand came up to trace the line of his jaw. "My people would say that denying warmth in a storm is madness. What would yours say?" "That I'm about to make the most beautiful mistake of my life." Thessa's laugh was like music, and her patterns flared bright with what he was beginning to recognize as joy. "Then perhaps we should make this mistake together." When their lips met, it was gentle at first, an exploration of differences and similarities. Her mouth was warm, her breath carrying the faint taste of alien spices. But as the kiss deepened, something primal awakened in both of them. Kellen's hands tangled in her dark curls while her luminescent patterns blazed like captured starlight. "Your skin," he murmured against her neck, "it's like touching light itself." "And yours," she replied, her voice heavy with desire, "burns like a star. So different from my people, so warm and solid and real." They held each other as the storm raged, no longer fighting the attraction that had been building since the moment she'd removed her armor. The boundaries between human and Zarnari, between duty and desire, blurred in the warmth of shared breath and intertwined bodies. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, Thessa's entire form glowing like a gentle aurora. "What happens now?" Kellen asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Thessa's patterns slowly settled into a steady, warm rhythm. "Now we have until morning to pretend the universe is only as large as this tent." Outside, the storm continued its assault on their fragile shelter, but inside, two souls from different worlds discovered that some connections transcend species, protocol, and the cold void between the stars. Dawn was still hours away, but the storm had begun to weaken, its howling reduced to a steady whisper against the tent walls. Kellen and Thessa lay entwined under the thermal blankets, her luminescent patterns providing a soft, ever-changing light show in the darkness. "Your people," Kellen said, his fingers tracing lazy paths along her glowing skin, "do they all respond like this to touch?" Thessa's patterns pulsed gently at his caress. "Not like this. What we share is unique. Among Zarnari, such intensity of bioluminescent response indicates deep emotional resonance. It is rare, even between bonded pairs." "Bonded pairs? Life partners. What humans might call marriage, though the concept is different for us." She shifted to look at him, her dark eyes serious. "Zarnari mate for life, Kellen. When we choose, it is absolute." The weight of her words settled between them. "And you've never found one worthy of such commitment." "My duty, my armor, they have always been my priorities." Her hand found his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Until tonight, I thought that was enough." Kellen pulled her closer, acutely aware that whatever this was between them, it was more than just stormborn desire. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that in my culture, what we have shared tonight is not taken lightly. The patterns of my skin, they have marked you." She gestured to her luminescence, which had taken on deeper, more complex rhythms. "Other Zarnari would see this and know I have chosen." The implications hit Kellen like a physical blow. "But we're from different species. Different worlds. Even if we wanted something more, how could it work?" Thessa was quiet for a long moment, her patterns dimming slightly. "It could not. Not easily. Zarnari serve for decades at a time. Humans cycle through assignments. Your people age faster than mine. You would grow old while I remained young. So this is just one perfect night," she finished. "Perhaps that is enough." Perhaps perfection is not measured in duration but in intensity. Kellen struggled with emotions he couldn't name. The thought of losing her, of returning to his routine patrols and empty tent, felt like losing a part of himself he'd only just discovered. "Don't look so tragic," Thessa said, her luminescence brightening with what might have been amusement. "We still have hours before dawn. Let us not waste them on sorrows that may never come to pass." May never. The joint patrol program is experimental. If successful, it may become permanent. Mixed species teams, long-term postings. Her patterns danced with possibility. Nothing is certain in war or diplomacy, Kellen Bryce. But nothing is impossible either. He kissed her then, pouring all his conflicted emotions into the contact. She responded with equal fervor, her body warming against his as her bioluminescence flared bright enough to illuminate the entire tent. "Teach me," he murmured against her lips. "Teach me about your people, your customs. I want to understand. And I want to learn about yours. About this strange species that builds walls around their hearts and calls it strength." Her smile was radiant. "We have much to discover about each other." They spent the remaining hours of darkness sharing stories, customs, and deeper intimacies. Kellen learned that Zarnari could communicate complex emotions through bioluminescent patterns, while Thessa marveled at human ability to express feeling through facial expressions and vocal tones. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the tent walls, they lay together in comfortable silence, both reluctant to acknowledge that their time was ending. "When the storm breaks," Thessa said finally, "I must return to my unit. Questions will be asked about my absence. And I have to file reports, continue my patrols." Kellen's arms tightened around her. "But this doesn't have to be goodbye." Her patterns flared with hope before settling into acceptance. "No, not goodbye. Never goodbye. But perhaps, until we meet again." As if summoned by their words, the wind outside finally stilled, leaving an almost unnatural quiet in its wake. Their perfect night was ending, but neither was ready to let go of what they'd found in each other's arms. The silence after the storm was deafening. Kellen and Thessa dressed slowly, each movement weighted with the knowledge that their bubble of intimacy was dissolving. The tent that had been their private universe now felt like just another military shelter on a frozen moon. Thessa's armor lay in pieces where she'd discarded it the night before. She examined the heating elements with professional efficiency, though Kellen noticed her hands trembling slightly. "The damage is extensive," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It will require full replacement." "I have spare thermal gear," Kellen offered. "Not military grade, but it'll get you back to your unit." She nodded, accepting the bulky human clothing. As she pulled on his oversized thermal jacket, something fell from her damaged armor, a small crystalline pendant that caught the morning light with prismatic fire. "What is that?" Thessa picked up the crystal, cradling it gently. "A warmth stone. They are, how do you say, mined from the deep caves of Zareth. We carry them as reminders of home." She hesitated, then held it out to him. "Among my people, sharing a warmth stone is a gesture of significant meaning." Kellen took the crystal, feeling its surprising weight and warmth. "What kind of meaning?" "It indicates that the giver wishes to maintain connection across distance and time. That they hope for reunion." Her patterns flickered with nervous energy. "It is not a promise, but rather, an intention." The crystal pulsed gently in his palm, as if alive. "Thessa. Say nothing," she said quickly. "Simply keep it. If circumstances allow us to meet again, you will have something to remember this night. If not..." She shrugged, though her luminescence betrayed her casual tone. Kellen closed his fingers around the warmth stone, feeling its heat seep into his skin. "What about your armor? How will you explain the damage?" "Equipment failures during storms are common. The cold affects even our best technology." She was fully dressed now in his spare gear, looking small and almost fragile in the oversized clothing. "And you? How will you explain your extended isolation. Storm damage to my comm array. Had to maintain radio silence until repairs were complete. They both knew the lies were necessary, but that didn't make them easier to speak. Thessa moved toward the tent entrance, then stopped. Kellen, what we shared tonight changed everything, he finished. I know. She turned back to him, and for a moment her careful composure cracked, revealing the raw emotion beneath. I do not know when we will see each other again. The Joint Patrol program is still experimental, assignments change rapidly. Then we'll make our own opportunities. Kellen stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. I'm not giving up on this, Thessa. Whatever this is. Her lips found his in one last kiss, tender and desperate and full of unspoken promises. When they parted, her bioluminescent patterns blazed with such intensity that the tent filled with warm, golden light. Until we meet again, she whispered in her own language, then translated, may warmth find you in cold places. And may you always find shelter from the storm, Kellen replied, though he wasn't sure if the words were traditional or simply felt right. Thessa stepped out into the crystal-clear morning, the storm having left the landscape transformed into a pristine wilderness of ice and snow. She looked back once, her dark eyes holding his, then began the trek toward her unit's position on the horizon. Kellen watched until she disappeared into the distance, her figure swallowed by the endless white expanse. Only then did he look down at the warmth stone in his palm. It pulsed gently, like a second heartbeat, and he realized that whatever happened next, he would never be the same. The Joint Patrol program was experimental, she'd said. Assignments could change. But as he began breaking down his camp, Kellen found himself making plans, requests for extended postings, applications for xenocultural liaison positions, anything that might bring him back to this frozen moon and the extraordinary woman who had changed his understanding of connection across the void. He carefully secured the warmth stone in his gear and began the long journey back to base, carrying with him the memory of luminescent skin, whispered confessions, and the promise of reunion written in alien starlight. The storm had passed, but its gift remained, not just the crystal in his pack, but the knowledge that some bonds transcend species, duty, and the cold darkness between worlds. And somewhere across the ice, Thessa carried the same knowledge, the same hope, and perhaps the same determination to defy protocol for the chance to touch the stars again.